In today's episode, Kat asks, we hear all the time that when a company has a public misstep that they will face impact negatively, but there's never been any kind of relevant study that dives into this topic of social digital reviews and brand impact, stock price, or revenue. Have you seen anything? So the challenge with using any kind of public data like this, especially stock price, is confounding data. Confounding data is when you have multiple contributors to an outcome. So there's a lot that goes into a stock price. There's obviously the trading, the buying and the selling. There is the investor sentiment, and there is very troublingly the fact that the investors may not be the customers, right? They may not have any connection to the customers. They are trading simply on things like technicals. They are trading on fundamentals. They are trading on all sorts of things that may not be connected to reality, the outside world. The stock market is actually a relatively poor indicator of a whole bunch of things. It is a good way to make some money, but it is not a good way to try and ascertain the impact of what a company does other than on the basics like earnings. And with the stock market, there are also all sorts of what we call shadow inputs or hidden inputs to the stock price. So there can be pools of trading. There can be institutional investing that is snapping up stocks, not necessarily even on what the company means or even what the company does, just the fact that it makes a certain margin or a certain amount of return on investment. And the stock market is also very much a lagging indicator. And the lag can be sometimes substantial depending, again, on who's doing the investing. A major portion of stock market investments are done by institutions, institutional investing, ETFs, funds, hedge funds, all these huge conglomerates. And as a result, they may buy, infrequently, sometimes months at a time. They're looking at stuff to basically buy and hold and manage a portfolio. So to try and calibrate social media on stock price is probably not going to yield anything useful for the majority of cases. This is doubly true because even if there was some impact, there are additional confounding variables. So let's say you have a company that has repeated public faux pas, right? They just repeatedly stick their foot in their mouth all the time. And they fess up, they change their ways, they clean house, public resignations and all this stuff. And what happens? The stock price might improve. Well, was social media the driver of that, or was the fact that the people running things might have just been really bad managers for a variety of reasons, and getting rid of them improved things? That is another example of a confounding variable where you just had a crappy manager or a crappy executive, get rid of that person, and it solves a whole bunch of problems. Certainly, I remember my days working in the agency world. Getting rid of one bad apple could change an entire office's performance, an entire company's performance. So that's a confounding variable as well. Was social media responsible for the problem? No, it may have highlighted the problem, but the ultimate problem was the bad apple in the bunch. Then, to add more complexity on top of that, there's the issue of portfolios, portfolio companies. A company may belong to a bigger holding company, and as a result, its performance may get masked. So, for example, Blizzard Entertainment is part of Activision Blizzard. Blizzard itself does all sorts of things to piss users off all the time. And they've made some pretty hilarious missteps. The most recent Warcraft 3 Reforged comes to mind as having the lowest game rating on Metacritic ever. And it was because they made a bad product. Does their stock price reflect that? Even though that was, 5 or 6 months ago? Does their stock price reflect the fact that this game was a dud? And that a whole bunch of people wanted their refunds, and eventually the company had to set up an automatic refund process? No. In fact, their stock's doing better than ever. Why? Because they're part of a portfolio company, Activision Blizzard, and there are so many other companies and games and franchises in this that mask the performance of that one unit. And even though there's a tremendous amount of social media conversation, most of it negative, about their stuff, it doesn't have an impact on the stock price. Why? Well, we have this little pandemic we're dealing with. And as a result, a whole bunch of people have taken up playing all sorts of video games of every kind. Every single gaming company has had massive growth in the last 6 months, for obvious reasons. As a result, even if Activision Blizzard made crap in this entire time period, their stock performed really well. Their company performed really well because of external circumstances that really benefited them. So we can't use these data points to ascertain the impact of social media easily. Could you assemble a data set of every publicly traded company and diagram out or mark in the data set those periods when there was a social media crisis, maybe an announcement in like the 7 days following? And could you then run something like a propensity score model on it? Absolutely, you could. I don't know of anyone who's done that either, because putting together that data set would be extremely laborious. And I don't know that you would find what you're looking for. Again, there's too many confounding variables. So if you wanted to prove the impact of social media, what could you do to understand it? One potential way would be studying organic search patterns for that company that are specific to purchase intent. So using fashion retailer Kenneth Cole, right? They've had a variety of foot and mouth moments. If you were to study the people who are searching with some level of intent, like Kenneth Cole near me, you might be able to ascertain whether that has diminished over time as a result of repeated foot and mouth incidents. But again, everything has changed since March 15th of this year, at least in the United States. That's what the timeline I'm using for that, for the pandemic. You don't search for that right now because you can't go to the store because it's not open, or it's highly restricted. So something like that is that particular physical location search intent would not work. You'd have to use something else, and then again run a propensity score model, even just a multiple linear regression against those two things: the social media track record and the search intent, to see if it has diminished at all. But with the understanding that even with that, there's a tremendous number of confounding variables: the amount of advertising you're running, how good you are at SEO, other things. Social media very often does not have a huge role in a company's results. You could winnow the data set down to those companies that are highly active, but then you're not going to necessarily prove that social media by itself does something so much as active social media companies behave differently, be a different cohort. So there's a lot to dig into, and I would certainly, if you know of a data set or a peer-reviewed study that has looked at this, please put it in the comments below along with your questions, because I'd love to read about it too. If you have follow-up questions, again, leave them in the comments. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and the newsletter. We'll talk to you soon. Take care. Want help solving your company's data analytics and digital marketing problems? Visit trustinsights.ai today and let us know how we can help you.